It's a human adventure. We're not exploring for robots. We're not exploring for machines. We are exploring for ourselves to better understand the rest of the universe. How does the Earth fit in? How does the sun affect our world? How does the moon affect our world? What is the history of all this?
Do you think there's intelligent life out there somewhere? And do you think we're ever going to find it? What are your thoughts on this?
We know right now that there are at least a septillion planets. That's such a big number, you can't possibly imagine. It's essentially infinite. It's an absolute fact that in the 4.5 billion year history of this planet, life developed. And it's been here without interruption for 4 billion years, and we're one of the products of that. So life is possible. The odds of it happening here and never happening in an almost infinite number of other chances, it just seems like myopically arrogant to think that it couldn't have happened anywhere else. But the distances are unfathomably huge. So big that time becomes dominant, and we don't know how to leave our own solar system.
You clearly managed to accomplish a lot in your life. When people get sometimes very emotional about things, it seems like you always have a very simple solution. I don't know, maybe you can speak on this.
I think the most important decision that you'll ever make is the one that you make next. We tend to sort of forgive ourselves for it, right? Like, oh, it was just a little decision. Your life is literally just the strung together sequence of the little things that you chose to do next. Be deliberate in your own life. Have big, audacious, crazy goals for yourself. Have a vision of the future that's impossible right now, but that if things go the right way and if you apply yourself the right way, some of that stuff might actually happen. And then use that whenever you can to help shape what you're going to do next.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Chris Hadfield, the retired astronaut, fighter pilot, and author. Your career spanned 35 years as both a military pilot and astronaut, including 3 missions and almost 4,000 hours in space, culminating in you serving as commander of the International Space Station. During that time, you chronicled your experiences on social media, becoming a global star with your performance of David Bowie's Space Oddity, now seen over 50 million times on YouTube. In recognition of your service, you were awarded the prestigious Order of Canada, the NASA Exceptional Service Medal, and inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. You've written a number of bestsellers, including your autobiography, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, which explores the philosophy you learned at NASA. Prepare for the worst and enjoy every moment. Your latest book, coming out later this year, The Defector, is an action thriller that follows the exploits of NASA fighter controller Kaz and draws on your many years of experience as a combat fighter pilot. Chris, welcome back to London Real.
Brian, it is a delight to see your face. You're looking very well, and I really enjoyed our conversation the previous times we've spoken. So I've been looking forward to talking to you today. Yeah, me too. We had an incredible connection, and I just remember you being so present with me in that studio, and I felt it, and everyone felt it, and it's probably what you're like always. Really in the moment. We can talk about some of that IP that maybe you learned up in space, going forward. The thing I got to ask you about right away is I think you came and saw us in like January 16, and I think it was a week or two before David Bowie passed. And I remember the day that we found out, we made a special compilation video of part of your space and part of your interview at London Real Studios talking about
the connection with the song, the way you modified it, the way it all happened. And I just watched that and it was really meaningful. So maybe we just talk about that first, because it says a lot about who you are. Can you talk about that video, and maybe for people that don't understand, explain how you filmed it in space, what it meant to you, and what's been the reaction even 7 years later to that thing?
Sure. I've been a musician my whole life. I bought my first guitar when I was 9 years old. I have a guitar right here in my office behind me. And up on the space station, there is a guitar. And it's put there because it's not just because I wanted to play guitar, but because a long time ago, our psychological support team, like most people on Earth know intuitively, they recognized that art is necessary for human mental health. I mean, you have to have that self-expression, and you can't just live on the dogmatic necessities of life. There has to be some beauty and some cleverness and originality and texture to what's happening. And so NASA psychiatrists bought this little guitar, and they went to the guitar shop, if you can imagine. You can imagine a little troop of NASA engineers and psychiatrists going to a guitar shop. But they put it up there. It's a little Canadian guitar made by Larry Vay, a little slightly undersized. And when I knew there was a guitar up on the space station, I thought, well, I've got to play and do some recording while I'm up there. I mean, what a rare opportunity to, if there's any spare time at all, to try and interpret what's happening. What is life like off of planet Earth? And can you turn that into some sort of artistic medium that then people can understand it a little more viscerally? And so it was my intent, in amongst all of the technical and leadership stuff going on. And I got up there and I recorded a song that my brother and I had written, because it was around Christmas time and we'd written sort of a space carol called Jewel in the Night. My son released that onto SoundCloud, and immediately people started on the internet going, whoa, there's an astronaut who's recording good music on the space station. He ought to do Space Oddity. And so my son, texts me a note. I'm working all day. I go into my little sleep pod at night. And there's a note from my son saying, hey, Dad, do a cover of Space Oddity. And I'm like, yeah, right. Why don't I just do a cover of Beethoven's Fifth as well? It's not, you can't just cover Bowie. He was brilliant. He was generational. He was just so clear thinking and artistically talented. But my son said something prophetic. He said, Dad, do it or you'll regret it forever. And I was like, well, shoot. Okay. So I got him to send me a copy of Bowie singing it. And all I did was a little karaoke version. I floated the microphone in front of me. I was listening to David in my headset. And then I just set up GarageBand on my iPad and just plumbed it through. And I was just sort of humoring my son. But when I listened to just my audio track of singing Space Oddity, I was kind of surprised. I was very surprised. It somehow felt right. It felt like it matched the circumstances. It matched the place that I was. And I don't know how Bowie knew that was going to work. He was only 19 or 20 when he wrote that song. He wrote it just before we walked on the moon. But it just sounded so right. I thought, oh, cool. Okay, I'm going to put a little guitar into that. So the beauty of GarageBand, I could do multi-track. I put guitar underneath. And then I was going, wow, that sounds really lovely together. A friend of mine used to be in Bowie's band. She was a singer in his band, a lady named M. Greiner. I sent a note to M saying, hey, M, crazy project, but I'm doing a version of Bowie's Oddity up here. What do you think? I sent her my audio track, and she's like, well, geez, the astronaut dies in Space Oddity. You may not want. And so we changed the words, my son and I. But when she heard the vocals, she was like, wow, that's way better than I thought. And so she said, can I put a little piano intro? And then once she had that, she said, I got a friend who's a multi-instrumentalist, Joe Corcoran. He put all those great instrumentals underneath. And then I had my new lyrics. And so I did another vocal track on top because I loved their instrumentals. And suddenly we had what we thought was kind of a really lovely version of Oddity. Then my son, Evan, weighed in again and said, Dad, you need to make a video. You're in space. No one's going to believe you if you don't make a video of it. So I'm like, hey, I'm kind of busy up here. I'm commanding a spaceship and we got 200 experiments. but he said, just do it. And so one Saturday I stole an hour, and I would play that track and sing along with myself and just film myself in a bunch of places I thought, might be interesting. I floated a guitar down the Japanese laboratory module and just made a bunch of clips and fired all that video to my son and said, if you can turn it into something, great. And he and a buddy of his edited it. And then we had a big emergency on the space station. I forgot. We had to get Bowie's permission and had to contact through his legal team, and through my friend M. But she came back and said, he loves it, and he described it as the most poignant version of the song ever recorded, and so he was tickled with the whole thing. And so my son edited into that video, and just with the timing, we didn't get it released until the day before I came home after 6 months. And it was so funny because I was super busy. We'd had a big emergency on the space station, had to do an emergency spacewalk. I just hadn't been paying any attention to what my son was doing. But I knew he'd released it. And I landed, we came flaming down through the atmosphere, rolled to a stop in the steppes of Kazakhstan, and the team's there to rescue. They open up the hatch, and this guy leans in and he sees me. His name's Sasha, and he goes, Chris, привет, мальчик, как вы живете? Hey, Chris, я видел твой клип, очень прекрасно. Which is like, hey, Chris, hey, how you doing, guy? Hey, I saw that video you made. Man, it's outstanding. And I'm thinking, holy crap, we just got released it, 12 hours ago. I am now in the middle of nowhere, Kazakhstan, and the guy has already seen that video and loved it, thinking, wow, a lot of people must have seen it. And you mentioned it'd be seen 50 million times. That's just at my son's website. All the other places it's hosted, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of versions. And so it's a great project. But the coolest thing, Brian, was that Bowie was almost at the end of his life. As you say, he died shortly after you and I did that last chat together. And I was in this unique position to honor him. A song that he'd written back when he was 19, 20, as a teenager. And he'd always wanted to fly in space, all the Mars themes and Starman themes. Even his last album had space themes. And so he got to see his creation performed in a place that he always wanted to go, in kind of a new and updated version. And I put a big smile on Bowie's face, in the last a couple of years of that long and productive life, which to me was just the best part of the whole project.
That's so epic. And so I can't believe that you did all that while you were still in space over that period of time, and you're beaming it back on low bandwidth, but it's still getting there back to Earth.
What you do is, you work 16-hour days, but we sort of have a union, the astronauts union, where we've said we've got to get a certain amount of protected time, go to the bathroom, eat, but also for sleep. And what I decided was, I don't want to come back from 6 months in space thinking, well, I didn't get much done, but boy, I'm well rested. I just didn't think that was the way to go. I thought, every night that I have a little bit of extra energy, I'm going to steal some of my designated sleep time to do the cool and personal stuff, to write and to write music. I wrote and recorded an album. And so late at night, when everybody was supposed to be asleep, with the door closed on my little sleep pod, I would have that small guitar in there, and you couldn't even put it horizontal because there wasn't enough room. And I would write and record music. And so I just had to squeeze it all in. But when we did come back and rolled to a stop, I felt like it was everything I could have wrung out of myself and wrung out of the experience. I'd done the whole thing. I just don't know how I could have executed it any more completely than I did. And to me, that's a little bit how I conduct life. But definitely, when you're doing something that is rare and unique, and something that you've worked towards a lot of your life, you try and fill every unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, because then the rest of your life, that can be one of those things you look back on. And and a lot of people would say, oh, well, what were you doing making music videos? You should have been working. We set records for the amount of science done per hour, per day, per week on the space station. No previous crew had been as productive as we were. And 4 days before we came home, when we had this major ammonia leak emergency, we still had the capacity to surge and work super long hours and to be able to do an emergency walk outside and save this whole space station. So yeah, to me, it was a balance, but I worked hard to balance it right. And to have, in amongst all the other things, to have that version of Space Oddity is just a treasure for me personally, but for a lot of people, the way that they see spaceflight as a result.
It's so unique. And I think in the past we've sent these things into outer space, like, records and all these things that show human existence. But I think your video has got to be right up there in one of the things we would love for forms of life to see, because they would see that and be like, wow, those humans are really taking things to the next level,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all real,
Yeah.
That's just, I've spoken obviously to so many people since my third space flight, but the perception that I have is that people see space flight a little more clearly, because it's not just me telling them about it or showing a graph or just a snapshot, but this is our artistic expression in an entirely new environment where the world is turning silently next to you and you're weightless, which is just so much different than the normal earthbound experience. And it gives people much more of a visceral, intuitive feel for what it would be like for them to be living on a spaceship. And so that's kind of a lovely side effect of having put that video together.
Yeah, and I mean, I just watched it back a few minutes ago, and I mean, even the tone of your voice, I don't think you would have gotten that if you were at a recording studio in Los Angeles. Like, for some reason, you had to be up there, right? You had to be there.
Weightlessness has an effect on you, psychological, of course, but also physiological. There's no gravity to push your diaphragm down at the bottom of your lungs, and there's no gravity to drain your sinuses. So your sinuses are always kind of clogged up. It's as if you always have a bit of a head cold, and it's hard to get a full breath because there's no natural gravity pushing the fluids down in your body. So it's a weird place to sing. Definitely a strange place to play guitar. You got to sort of reteach yourself how to play guitar. But I think it made it easier to hit the high notes, just because of the physiological changes going on. And there's a lot of high notes in Oddity, especially in the chorus, so that was a little bit of a benefit.
It's interesting how we forget sometimes that there's more ways to communicate than, a written piece or a piece of video. And that as humans, like, we really need lots of different forms of communication, from the physical to dance to art to music, to really convey the real feelings. And with you doing that, and I know you used to post a lot of those pictures on your Twitter account, I think back in the day, we talked about last time you were here, and just those brief pictures communicated, like you said, a completely different narrative than they would get with the normal ways that NASA typically communicate. We see the blast off, we see the landing, we see a couple, news interviews with you guys up there. But like you said, to convey all the subtleties of the feeling and maybe even the point of the journey takes other mediums somehow.
It's a human adventure.
Yeah.
And it's easy to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Rockets are just an amazing mechanical manifestation of human imagination. But, they're kind of thrilling. It's like going to a fireworks show, But we're not exploring for robots. We're not exploring for machines. We are exploring for ourselves to better understand the rest of the universe. How does the Earth fit in? How does the sun affect our world? How does the moon affect our world? What is the history of all this? How did Earth get to where it is? Why is Mars, which had a very similar beginning, why is Mars so radically different than the Earth now? What is the future of our planet? All of that is human centric. It's for us to better understand what's going on, and then all of the human stories that go into the effort of exploration itself. To me, that's really interesting part. It's the humanity of it that is endlessly fascinating and the most complicated part. And so trying to share not just the fact of how we fly in space, but sort of the ethos of it and the impact of it and the how it affects different people in different ways. That is the true story. And as we're now not just living internationally on the station for the last 22 years, but right on the cusp now of start walking on the moon again, but with the intent of having ever longer and longer human presence starting to settle on the surface of the moon. That's where we are in history. And what does this mean for the grand human adventure? And how can we make it sustainable in the long term? And how can we make it beneficial to ourselves and everything else on Earth? That's the great adventure going on. And I work hard all the time, whether I'm in space or back here on the surface, to try and share the ideas of that.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you, Chris. I mean, how has the space narrative or our relationship with space and beyond changed since you were up there? I mean, it's been, 20, 25 years, and a lot of things have changed. We've got the Webb telescope up there, which is completely next level. You've got us, I think, landing on the moon in the next couple of years. You've got Musk constantly talking about Mars, to where it's really it's in the zeitgeist, it's in people's minds. How has the relationship we have with space changed since you were up there?
Imagine what it was like in Europe 600 years ago when you stood on the shores of the Atlantic. I mean, for gosh, I don't know, 30,000 years, people have been living in Europe. And when you look to the west, when you walk down to the water's edge, you look and there's the ocean and there's the sky. And it's just huge room to imagine, but with very little information. And the reason we didn't have anything beyond imagination was we hadn't invented good enough boats yet. We didn't know how to sail and navigate beyond sight of land. But as soon as we started inventing the technology that would allow us to go explore, it opened up huge learning opportunities, understanding, the world is round and the differences of all of the different continents and how this all works together and how we fit in. It's suddenly, by a human invention of transport, it opened up almost limitless possibilities. And that was just with boats. And then, of course, faster boats, steamships, and then airplanes. And now, I mean, later today, I'm going to just jump on an airplane and go to San Francisco, right across North America. And all I'm really thinking about is, will the Wi-Fi work and will the food be okay? And I could go to Australia the same way. And that integration of technology at almost an invisible way into our freedom to pursue things and to learn things and to imagine and answer that imagination, that's what's going on in space. It used to be impossible. Just up until 1961, we were just standing on the shores of the Atlantic wondering. But with Gagarin and then Al Shepard and then everything since, a very few of us, like the very earliest explorers, whoever you want to choose, started to get a glimpse of what lies beyond our atmosphere. But what's really changed recently is we've gone from like early sailing ships to steamships, maybe even to airplanes, where the new rocket ships are reusable and way, way safer than the previous ships. And so they're simpler and they're safer, and therefore they're much, much cheaper. And so it's opening access to not just a very rare few, extremely trained astronauts, but to more and more people are going to be able to take that voyage across the unknown. And that's where we are in history. But what are we going to do with it? How are we going to regulate it? How are we going to integrate it into what is considered normal? Let's take the moon as an example. You mentioned within the next few years, we'll have people on the moon. The Chinese said just last week, by 2029, we will have a Chinese lander on the moon and Chinese folks walking around on the moon. So what are we going to do? This isn't just a technical question. This is very much a human socio-political question. Whose laws apply on the moon? And are we just going to take the current snapshot of ridiculous geopolitics on Earth and just superimpose that on the surface of the moon? We'll have a little America, a little Russia, a little China. That would be maybe understandable, but it sure would be regrettable. And we have a good example. We settled Antarctica differently than we settled any other continent on Earth. We did it much more deliberately, and we did it much more cooperatively. And the geopolitical set of laws and cultures that we have in Antarctica is different than anywhere else on Earth. So we have the capacity to learn from what we've done in the past and to do new things differently. The moon, if you laid it out on a map, is bigger than Africa, and it hasn't been hardly surveyed at all. Literally, we've just scratched the surface in a few spots. So where we are in history now, how it is that we're going to settle the moon, how do we work with normal human foibles and problems? How can we also find ways to rise above ourselves and maybe do something better than we used to? That's what's really changed since I first flew in space in 1995. And it's what I'm so passionately involved in every day right now, is being a part of all that and trying to help drive the change in as productive way as I can possibly contribute.
They have this concept, I know you're aware of it, called the overview effect, where a very few people like yourself have been up there and looked back on Earth. And you have even spacewalked, where you had one hand, I think, twice, and you were holding on by one hand, and you said, when you can be out there in space, I think we talked about last time you were here, and see the Earth and then look over and see the rest of the universe, I guess it's a very special moment. And I just had Neil deGrasse Tyson on here a week or two ago, and he said, also, Brian, when that view was seen from the moon with the Earth of just a tiny little dot in the horizon of the moon, there was I think he opened up his latest book with a quote from the astronaut saying that the squabbles on Earth, they seem even less important from the moon. What was your experience of that feeling when you were up there?
At first, Brian, when you first get to space, it's maybe a little bit like if you went into the greatest midway of the World's Fair. If you were suddenly just from wherever you are right now, sitting comfortably in your chair, and you were suddenly thrust into the onslaught of stimulation of with the rides and the carnival barkers and the people and the smells and the colors and everything all simultaneously around you, it's overwhelming because it's just so different from your typical normal. And what you end up doing is picking out individual things, right? You have to kind of just filter out all of the differences and look for things that you already know. Look for, okay, there is a Cupid doll thing. Okay, I'm going to go over and do that. Or there's a ride. Okay, let's get in a line because I understand how lines work. Get a ticket and we'll go for a ride on that ride. But if you could stay in that cacophony of a carnival midway for a week, then you would get far more attuned to the subtleties of it, and you would see the great parts and the not so great parts, and you would understand it so much more completely. When I first launched on my very first spaceship, and the engines worked properly, the vehicle guided us, and unstrapped and floated to the window, and we were coming up on the UK because we launched out of Florida and we had northeast. And by the time you get to the window, there's just the green of Ireland and then the south of England and Wales and the Isle of Wight and everything right there. I floated to the window and I looked down, and for the first time in my life, I could see for thousands of miles. I could see from Stockholm to Rome and the Alps, and it was like that carnival. And so what I ended up doing to cope with the overwhelm was to go, okay, what do I recognize? Oh, that's London. London. I used to live in London. I lived in Crystal Palace. I had a bed sit in Crystal Palace. There's London. And that must be the Thames. And I wanted to grab another astronaut and go, hey, look, London, right there. I used to live in London. because it was a way of coping with the incredible new richness of the place that my life choices had gotten me to. But the next time you come around, you don't just see London. You start to see some of the surrounding. And then the next time, and I've been around the world, whatever, 2,650 times, you start to actually see the entirety of the world, the incredible, rich textural beauty of it, and the age of it starts to seep into you. You get a sense of the unfathomable age of what 4.5 billion years actually means, and how tough this planet is, and how tough life is, and our tiny little, what do we get, maybe 85 years out of 4.5 billion, which is, inconsequential, and yet it's what we have. And so when people talk about the overview effect and trying to put things into perspective, part of it is like just three-dimensional. I'm only this big, and the Earth is this big, and the moon's that big, and the universe is essentially endless. But also temporal, time. The universe is approaching 14 billion years old, and Earth's been here for, about 4.5. So a large percentage of that. But people have only been here for such a tiny little bit on the end of it. If the entire history of the Earth was a standard high school running track, people have been here for like half the thickness of one playing card, on the length of a whole running track. We're just this little nothing right here at the very end. And so the overview effect that I keep, or that influences my thinking, is one of how fundamentally unimportant we are. So be humble. Recognize that we are not, the whole purpose of the world wasn't us, get over ourselves. But at the same time, make the most of the time that you do have. Try and understand things as clearly as you possibly can, and try and be contributory. We can find zero evidence of this level of awareness, of this level of intelligence ever having existed on this planet before. The responsibility that comes with that, the desire not to squander it, not to do something stupid and blow it up or snuff it out, and to make the most of it, and to try and get it so that all of our eggs aren't in one basket. It kind of puts all that into a perspective of an imperative, a personal imperative of how to make the most of this incredibly fortunate experience of living here. And that's, when I think about floating at the window of a spaceship, that's the feeling that I get inside myself, of privilege, of wonder, of continuity, and of tremendous opportunity to try and make the most of every single day.
Do you think some of these space orbits that are coming up with Virgin and the one that Bezos is doing and the others, I know it's not the same as where you were as far as location-wise, but do you think that could contribute to the greater human consciousness having a bit more perspective?
I didn't know how to answer your question when they were first designing it. Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, the two companies under Sir Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
And, it's easy to be jaded and judgmental, especially when you don't know what's going on. That's the easiest time. But when I think about it, if someone has dreamed about it their whole life, like one of the people that flew in Blue Origin, and he went to work for NASA because that was as close as he could come. And he worked hard his whole life. He was, sort of a middle-level manager at NASA and did well, but wasn't, running the whole thing or anything. But he saved his money his whole life, hoping, that someday maybe he'd have a chance. And he saved enough. And, it's about the price of a luxury car. So what do you do if you've saved your whole life? What do you do with your money? How do you reward yourself? He decided, I'm going to buy a space flight. And he went and flew with Blue Origin. And I mean, to talk to him, he's got this light in the back of his eyes and this great sense of privilege and satisfaction. But he's not just bragging about it or keeping it to himself. He's speaking in schools, and he's writing about it and trying to let people see where we are in history. But I think the person that maybe expressed it the best is Bill Shatner, William Shatner, the actor. I know Bill. I don't know if you've spoken to him or not, but I've done several things with him. And he's in his 90s, and he flew to the edge of space and back. And he is as jaded and experienced and, kind of confident about his own perception of the universe as any 90-year-old, especially a successful 90-year-old actor. I think everybody should take 3 minutes and listen to how Bill reacted right after he landed from his short space flight. It is a torrent of human emotion and wonder and amazement and a shift of personal perspective. It was not what he expected. And in fact, now that he's thought about it for a while, he's realized just how precious and rare the world is. He sees space as death, as emptiness, as hell, as the inverse of the world itself. And it's so easy to take the world for granted when you've never seen it from any other perspective. And so I find, when you ask, is this worthwhile or not? Just sit and listen to what Bill Shatner said and what he's said since then. And that's just someone who's had just a little short taster's menu view of space. And as the machines get better, more and more people will be able to understand it even better. So yeah, we need to regulate it. We can't just, it's like when cars renew or airplanes renew. We didn't have any rules and it was a big mess. But once we get it sorted out and integrated into what sustainable ops are going to be, I think it's going to be an interesting, informative, and kind of vital part of Earth awareness, human self-awareness, and an opportunity maybe to rise to the next level of understanding.
While we're on Shatner, did Star Trek play any type of role in your curiosity for space, or looking back on that original?
I'm going to grab something here.
I guess I'm about to hit something here. And because I grew up on the original Star Treks. Oh yeah. I mean,
so I keep memorabilia here in my office, but when I was a kid, I was watching first run Star Trek on television.
Okay.
As each episode arrived every week, my older brother and I was just barely the right age to try and get it. But
is it like 69? Is that when these were out?
No, it was like 66, 67 is when the original Star Trek came on.
Okay.
And it was, it was like a Western, but it was, just look at that cast, it was
amazing.
Alien and a Russian and a black woman. And, it was just such a different kind of set of assumptions. Gene Roddenberry was brilliant in the way he put it together. And they addressed some issues that were quite thought-provoking. And so I was a little kid growing up on a farm, and this was like permission to imagine a whole different reality of the future. That it doesn't have to be the way it is right now. We have other choices. We have other possibilities, and our technology is going to enable a lot of those. So it was really important to me. And also like the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey with Stanley Kubrick, based on Arthur C. Clarke's books and ideas. And when my very first space flight, Brian, on a space shuttle, if you remember the start of 2001: A Space Odyssey, they launched on like a reusable ship that went up and docked with a space station that was under construction, and there was music and there was grace and there were, people from different organizations, and it was partially commercial and partially government. That's what I did on my first space flight, just a couple decades later. So that necessity to have artistic examples and imaginations in front of us when we're young, it's absolutely vital. I mean, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they're weird people. They're not, they're very successful. They're not just average people, or they wouldn't have done the things they've done. But both of them have also formed space companies for over 20 years that are pushing back absolutely the edge of what's possible. And both of them have done it because they were inspired by science fiction. They were inspired by Star Trek and space movies and such. And they have made it kind of a purpose of what they're doing to try and build us the capability to more safely and more simply leave our planet and start to explore everything else. And I think that fundamental idea of the importance of inspiration in life choices, and then in levels of productivity within your life, I think that's really important. And every time I've had a chance to, watch Star Trek or think about Star Trek or meet someone from Star Trek, it just, my whole body smiles, just because it was such a pivotal part of my own path and choices through life.
So I would have been maybe 7 or 8 years old, and it would have been late 70s. But I saw those on TV because they would just do the reruns. And for some reason, it was one of the things that was played quite a lot, probably because it was still really good. And I would just go through them. And my dad was a electrical engineer from Caltech, and so he kind of liked that too. So it seemed to be on all the time. But yeah, hard to overstate how that show inspired the brain to grow when you're a little kid. I mean, like you said, just the cultural way it would just throw things into the mix. The way Roddenberry did lots of things. I think he once said he wouldn't make the monsters scary. He had a lot of principles in there that allowed the brain to expand in a different way that television hadn't seen before. And yeah. And
I think also people forget just how it almost didn't happen at all.
Really?
I mean, they couldn't get funding for it. I forget one of the existing movies. I think it was, who was it, Lucille Ball or someone who actually helped provide the funding because she thought this is going to be a worthwhile thing to do. Wow. And then it was, skin of their teeth. They never had enough money and they, just trying to do this thing. And when it was over, none of the cast and crew came away with very much money at all. I think, in fact, Bill Shatner went back to living in a trailer, down by the river kind of thing. Wow. It wasn't like they got wealthy doing it. It was only when the impact of the ideas sort of took hold. And then they thought, well, shoot, there's enough of a following. We should maybe make a Star Trek movie. And then people started to realize, wow, this was a before its time idea. And it's going to lead into a lot of other things. And it set a whole new sort of genre and path of ideas, but it barely managed it. It was everything Roddenberry and his team could do just to even make it happen at all. And now, like a lot of things, when you look at them in the rearview mirror, they just seem like, well, of course that happened. What else would have happened? But we sort of forget just how close so many of the magnificent things in life are to never happening at all. And it takes tenacity and vision and bravery and willingness to fight the odds in order to get those things done, including Star Trek.
Yeah, and without Star Trek in 2001, which I think came out in 1968, I mean, without those, you might wonder, would we be where we are in the space program? It would be interesting to run that time machine back, that's for sure. And by the way, those Star Trek episodes, they still hold up. You can still watch them today. They're still better than ever. The cast is amazing. Shatner kills it. It's incredible. You mentioned Elon Musk. I'm curious, Chris, if you were a younger man, would you accept the mission to Mars? And do you think we need to be on Mars?
Well, right now, we don't have any spaceships that can credibly take us to Mars. But, it wasn't very long that we didn't have spaceships that could credibly take us a lot of places, So, and the pace of invention is accelerating. So, predicting when things will actually happen in the future is it's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future, right? But my life has been about setting what seemed like impossible goals and then looking at whether there's any chance that might happen as part of my life. Is there any chance? And if there is, then okay, how can I start changing who I am to be part of the team of people that is going to be able to do those things that are so exciting to me? And that's the choice I made when I was 9 to try and turn myself into an astronaut at a time when Canada didn't have astronauts, didn't have rockets, didn't have a space agency. That was impossible.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.